see a lot of people here with me. Thanks everyone for joining me for this webinar about test automation. So don't believe the hype. Where am I going with this? Well, don't believe the hype is about not believing everything you are told about test automation. You should know things such as why you should automate things. What are the usual misconceptions about test automation? How do you select a framework? How do you select a tool? What is a framework or what is a tool? And how do you plan for test automation to be able to have a successful test automation project? So let's go straight into it and start on why automate. Well, it's basically about efficiency and about saving time and money, because at the end of the day, we all work for companies and these companies need to be profitable or else we don't have work. There is nothing to test. This is like really what testing is about. And so what we aim for with automation is faster execution, faster feedback, increased test coverage, testing at scale, because for instance, there are some tests like performance tests which can't be humanly done. You need the help of tools to do those. And also decrease human error because, well, machines are better at maths and that sorts of things. It's much better than we are. This is what we aim for with test automation. And on the other hand, we also release human resources and reduce the stress on human resources so they can be more productive, more assertive. And in turn, you get time to do all this better, to improve your execution times, to have faster feedback again, to increase your test coverage, etc. So I'm a big adept, like you already might have noticed, of test automation, because when I started, the first time I started doing automation, I was in a project where I would spend roughly around maybe 1 week to do some tests on some like hundreds of forms. And then I spent a week automating those tests. And from there on, I didn't have to spend a week each time I had to do a release. I just ran those tests. Obviously, I would have to also do some manual testing, but that was perfectly fine because I didn't have to do like even not even half of the work I used to do. So this is why we automate. And what do TestRail customers have to say about test automation and about their challenges? So this is from the TestRail survey from last year, and people claim that they want their teams to be more efficient when it comes to testing, when it comes to Q&A. They want their teams to automate more test cases, to complete testing in less time, to easily report on the progress of testing, and to accelerate time to market for new features or bug fixes. So all of this boils down once again to efficiency. You want to be efficient. You want to do things as fast as possible to keep up with your competitors. And even reporting is the one that stands a little aside from the other points, but using automation, you can automatically also create reports, etc. So you don't have to manually also do the reporting part. And also some information from the DORA project. The DORA project is about research on the DevOps fields, and DevOps, as we know, is one of the prominent methodologies for developing software because it believes in automation, it believes in efficiency. And the DORA project, it identified these 4 key indicators as measures for delivery performance. So you have the lead time for changes, so the time from when you start developing something until it goes to production, the mean time to recovery, that means the time you take to recover in case you do something wrong happens with your system, the deployment frequency, how many times you can deploy in a week, let's say, and also the change failure rate. So you might be able to deploy a lot, but also you need to make sure that most of those deployments don't go wrong. And how can you achieve or improve all these indicators? Well, with automation. That's what DevOps vouches for. And about automation, you are doing it wrong if your test automation is making delivery less efficient. So again, efficiency. So if any of your test automation process is making things less efficient, then you are doing it wrong. And let me give you some examples. So for instance, when you're developing your automated test cases, if it takes you more time to create a test case than it takes to run it manually for as many times as you need, then you are doing something wrong, because you are not having a return on the investment of automating that test case. So for instance, if you take, let's say, 5 days to automate a test case that only takes you 5 minutes to execute manually, how long does it take for you to get a return on that investment? Maybe it wasn't worth actually having automated that test case. So this is something you should think about. Also maintenance, if it takes you more time to maintain a test than the time it would take to execute it manually, then it's also not worth it. Then visibility, what I see a lot is that some people actually have good automation projects, but they are not visible. They are just inside their machine or in some tool that executes the tests, but then management doesn't see the results, the stakeholders don't see the results, and so they don't support your automation. So you should also bring visibility to your test results, whether it is by using, for instance, a test management tool. So you would import those results there and aggregate that information with the manual testing as well, and generate incredible reports from there, or just having a dashboard that shows whether your tests are passing or not. Also trust. So if your tests fail so often and randomly, nobody will trust their results. So your automation is also not reliable, and your automation project will probably fail. So you need to make sure that people trust your automated test results, and you need to make them as consistent as possible. So going to this next section, so test automation misconceptions. This is almost like my personal rant about test automation, because these are things I hear a lot and it really annoys me. So let's go straight into the first one. So the first one is Selenium is not a test automation framework. And what I have to tell you about this is that it is right. So Selenium is not a test automation framework. And what I see a lot, for instance, when I used to do a lot of interviews back when I was managing an automation team, people, when I ask, hey, what framework are you using? They would say Selenium. And I would say, okay, you use Selenium to automate your browser interactions, but behind that, what's the framework? What's the programming language, etc.? So if you say you're using Selenium as the framework, well, you should think again, and you should be able to explain better what you are using as a framework, because this is straight from the Selenium website. They say Selenium automates browsers. That's it. What you do with that power is entirely up to you. So it's not a framework. It's just a tool to automate browsers. Another one is test automation frameworks always provide the ability to automate UI and/or API tests. Well, this isn't exactly right. And this comes along what we were talking about. So test automation framework is a tool that provides an environment for test automation, and it usually includes a test automation harness and test libraries, but it's only usually, it's not required to include that. This is from the ISTQB glossary, and I also got this from Wikipedia. So it says an automation framework is not a tool to perform a specific task, but rather infrastructure that provides a solution where different tools can do their job in a unified manner. So it's about how you are going to implement the test. It provides you with an infrastructure, with rules to implement your tests, with ways to do a setup, to do a teardown, to organize your test cases. So this is what an actual framework is. But yeah, if we are talking about frameworks like let's say Cypress or Playwright, they are made to test the UIs, web UIs. So yeah, those already have their libraries, their drivers to do that, and they're still frameworks, but they're not pure frameworks. When we talk about frameworks, we are talking about a set of rules and an infrastructure to develop your test cases. And number 3, the goal of test automation is to fully replace all human testing. Well, this is obviously a lie. Well, a lot of people defend that, well, with test automation, you don't need actual testers, etc. That, for instance, you could just have developers and they would write automated tests. Now there's also ChatGPT, which is kind of trying to change the game. But still, usually what these give you is they are helpers. They are not replacing your work. They are helping you do your work. So the test automation's goal is to make testing more efficient by removing the effort of repetitive and time-consuming activities, allowing you to focus on the human side of testing. So the human side of testing is things related to business, related to sentiment, to emotions, etc., things that only humans can feel. So yeah, we are important, and we are also the people who implement test automation. So we are always part of it. And now, selecting a framework or a tool. How do you select a framework or a tool? Nowadays, we have plenty. When I say plenty, it's like a lot of test automation frameworks. These are the free ones or open source ones. And this is just a small sample of the frameworks that currently exist. So there are lots more. On the left, you can see things more in JavaScript, more towards UI testing, web UI testing. Then you have some in C# as well, some Java frameworks. You have Cucumber as well. You have things to test mobile devices more to the right. And there are, like I said, there are plenty more. So it's hard to pick one from all these. And you don't only have this, you also have commercial frameworks. These frameworks, they have some advantages because they try to help you automate your test cases. You have probably better support from the companies, etc. But then again, they might have issues with things like scalability, reusability, customization, and you're dependent on the features that they provide and their maintenance. While with the other frameworks, if you are very proficient coding, then you can do, well, mostly anything. Still, some people, well, it makes sense for some people to use this sort of frameworks, especially when they are not so technical, etc. And these frameworks also bring something to the table, like helping you understand why your tests are failing, etc. And yeah, it's about context, picking one type or the other of frameworks, and also about money, of course. About decision parameters. So what would be the decision parameters to select a test automation framework? So this is based on my opinion. Some people may have a different opinion, but these have helped me in the past to create successful automation projects. One of the main things is thinking about who will be using the framework. Depending on who will be using the framework, you might want to pick a specific programming language or a specific interface. Because if someone doesn't know JavaScript, then are you going to hand them a JavaScript framework? So they will have to learn JavaScript, they will have to learn the framework, they will have to learn everything. And this is not something you can learn from day to night. So you need to be very careful with this. And you also need to think about the framework learning curve. So you may know the language, but if the learning curve is too steep, maybe you want to take another framework as well. Then there are some strategic requirements. So the technology is being tested. You must think whether you're testing a mobile app, a web app, or you are testing services, etc. The test levels you want to execute test sets. So if you want to do things more like component testing, you have frameworks that are more suited for that. Others are more suited for end-to-end tests. Limitations such as cross-browser testing. So some frameworks support most browsers, others maybe just support one of the browsers. Integrations with other tools, customization and extensibility, whether they allow you to create plugins or for everything you need, if you need to customize it to your particular use cases. And also reporting. Reporting, I think it's also very important because if you don't have good reporting, it will be hard to show your results, and it will be hard to debug when tests start failing, because it's inevitable whether tests will always fail for one reason or another. It might be because they're flaky, it might be because well, something changed with the application and you need to understand why they are failing. And then there are also some general framework quality indicators, such as the dev experience. So if the framework has a lot of documentation, a lot of small things that help you develop tests in an easier manner, then that's great. Maintenance and update. So if the framework isn't maintained or updated in a long time, maybe it might be becoming obsolete and you shouldn't go there as well. And also community size and support, because let's be honest here, when we are programming or even just using tools, we always run in some sort of trouble. We don't know how to do something. And if you have a big community, it will help. I'm sure you'll get help much more easily. Either if you can just go to Google and search for things, or you can join, for instance, a Slack community, something like that, and get help from there. And then, of course, pricing, because, well, if it's not free, you need to consider pricing. And above all, my biggest advice is always do a proof of concept. So don't take whoever is trying to sell you the framework. And then when I say sell, I'm not talking about someone selling you something for money, just even someone trying to say, hey, this framework is really great. It works great for me. Okay, but does it work in your context with the technologies you want to test in your projects? So you should always do a proof of concept using the framework in your project. And when you do this proof of concept, always make sure that you involve everyone that will be developing the test cases, because if you don't do that, it might work for you, but then it won't work for the rest of the team, and you will have a problem in the future. I mentioned that the people who are testing are an important part, and to me they are the most important part. Actually, when I say the people who are testing are people who are developing the automated test cases, because at the end of the day, you might have you may pick the best framework, but if whoever is implementing the test doesn't know how to use the framework, then, well, you won't be successful. Who is testing? From the TestRail survey, we can see that a lot of people have manual testers as their primary testers, and you may want to try to get them to do some automation. So maybe for this, you should go with low code or no code tools. If developers are responsible to write their own test code, then maybe pick the same language they are used to developing to develop the app. If you have test automation engineers, then maybe consult those test automation engineers on their preferences and their experience. And if everyone is involved, then you need to come to an agreement to what is best given your project's context. And also from the Capgemini continuous testing report, you can also have a specialized quality engineering team. You may have agile teams doing the testing. You may have end-to-end specialists, and you may even have testing as a service. So perhaps if you have an outside team doing your tests, you may have to take a decision. So for instance, go with what they suggest, or if you want to then keep maintaining the tests that they're going to develop, if they're going to hand over the tests back to you, then you should make sure that they use a technology that someone in your team can then pick up on and keep maintaining those test cases, or all that work will be for nothing, and you'll be just throwing money out the door. A quick example on how to pick a framework. So in this example, let's take this scenario. You're testing an app for Android and iOS, which is developed in React Native. React Native allows you to generate Android and iOS apps from the same code base, which is written in JavaScript. And how do you start where do you go to start picking the framework? Well, my best advice is check the documentation on the development framework, because usually they have recommendations for what works best, what people use to automate tests for applications developed in that sort of framework. So for instance, here they say that in the React Native community, Detox is a popular framework because it's tailored for React Native apps. And then another popular library in the space of iOS and Android apps is Appium. So you have these two choices. So what do you have to measure here? you need to see that Detox is JavaScript, while Appium is language and framework agnostic, technology agnostic. So you can choose, and well, mostly any language and any framework. So you can use Appium whether you're using Python, C#, Java, etc. You just get the driver for your language, and you just use it. So if you're not comfortable with JavaScript, when I say you, again, I mean whoever is going to be implementing these tests. So if you're not comfortable with JavaScript, maybe you should pick Appium. But if you're comfortable with JavaScript, because it's tailored for React Native, it will be easier to probably test some of the things in your apps. So you should go with Detox. And Appium is also very popular, so you will also have a lot of community support there. So even if you know JavaScript, maybe you might want to use Appium. So yeah, I'm just giving you choices here. And of course, you can also dismiss their suggestions and go with other frameworks and tools such as low-code or no-code tools in case your team doesn't have the skills to actually do some programming and actually get the Appium or Detox running. So now final part, planning for test automation. How do you plan to have a successful test automation project? Here are some of the goals some teams set according to the continuous testing report from Capgemini. Some of the metrics you can grab from here are the defects found at each stage of the pipeline. So for instance, if you are able to track the defects that your test detected in each stage of the pipeline, that would be great. Requirements and code coverage. So if you can measure that from your automated suite, that would also be awesome to have. And the level or percentage of automation, it sort of goes along the same line. Some others I would suggest tracking would be the failed builds, for instance, the flakiness and the execution time. These are important metrics when it comes to automated testing. So yeah, know your goals and measure them. So you set these goals and you go from here. Then you also need to know your system. So is your system modular or is it a monolith? Because a modular system will probably be easier to test. You can test more granularly. So you can test just some modules and then do some integration tests and then end-to-end tests. So when you have a monolith, you will probably only be able to do end-to-end tests unless you break it down in some way, but it's a much harder technical challenge. Also, is your backend architecture based on microservices? Is there a public API? So maybe you might want to do some data setup through a public API, something like that. You might want to test the API instead of testing the UI because it's easier and faster as well. Another thing, what are the front-end interfaces? What technologies are being used? So this comes down to whether you're testing a web UI, whether you're testing a mobile app, whether it's supposed to be tested on Android only or Android and iOS, etc. This also makes a difference. Where is the data stored? What is your database technology? Because, well, imagine that you are testing through the UI, but then there's this particular piece of data that it's not displayed on the UI, but you must make sure that it's there on the database when you submit something. Then you need to be able to also interact with the database in your automated test suite. So that's also something to consider. And also, do you have caching mechanisms, asynchronous messaging, etc.? Because these are things you need to consider, which may impact your test automation suite and bring things like flakiness and some unwanted behaviors as well. So this is something you should definitely also consider. So yeah, here my advice is ask a lot of questions about the system you're going to do some automation for. Then you also need to know when you want to test, so in which stage. This is a diagram by Dan Ashby. It reflects the continuous testing. So we have that infinite loop there, and you have the planning, the branching, the code, the merge, the build, release, etc. And in continuous testing, we define that you can test everywhere. But it's not wise to want to test everywhere when you are doing automation. You need to start small, and then you can grow from there. You could start on the build stage, and you can automate some smoke and some sanity tests that will run when you have your build ready. Or you can have some automated regression tests when you have a release. Or you can have some automated live smoke tests when you have a deploy. And you can even have synthetic tests when you already deploy your application. And you can also automate log checks and alerts. This is a little out of scope of test automation, but it's also something that has helped me in the past. So, but like I was saying, pick one battle at a time. So maybe start with smoke and sanity tests, then move to regression tests, or maybe if you can reuse some of those smoke tests to run in your live environment as well, in case that brings some value. Also try to do that for a quick win, and then just iterate on it. And the most important part is plan. Keep planning, keep adapting, keep improving your test automation suite. Also know your challenges. So mostly technical challenges here, not only technical challenge, also human challenges. From the TestRail survey, we could see that some of people's challenges were simply developing automated tests. So just the development was a challenge. Some people were more specific. So they said it was end-to-end testing, managing data and testing environments, early involvement in the development of new requirements before coding begins. This part is important. It may not look related, but it is important because if you can have a contribution early in the development, you can ask for things such as, imagine you're testing a web interface, you can ask for locators, you could ask for a trigger to be able to test some feature. Where, for instance, if you inject a cookie, you could see some application behavior you wanted to test, things like that. Also adapting QA to new development workflows such as CI and CD. Here you need to have knowledge about CI/CD tools, for instance, pipelines, pipeline as code, etc. And then training. Well, it sort of goes along the first, just developing automated tests. You need to provide proper training to your team, because this is no trivial task. Then some potential solutions to these challenges from the continuous testing report. For some people, testing in production would be enough. Of course, this doesn't suit like most, I would say most 90% of people won't be happy with testing in production. I wouldn't be either. But for some businesses that are not so mission critical, that could be okay. And this would solve the environment's problem, for instance. Delivering test data on demand is also a solution for your environments and test data challenges, and automated provisioning of test environments. So you want to test a module and you have a way of just spinning up that module and you could just test it. These are solutions that people claim to use, but these are very technically challenging, and I haven't found exactly a tool that solves these problems. You have to solve it within your context, and usually with very custom implementations. So if anyone knows about some tools that solve these challenges, please feel free to share. Another potential solution is improving your testability. So here is I'm quoting the DORA report, more specifically the technical DevOps capabilities section, and they talk about loosely coupled architecture. So they say that loosely coupled systems are important to the effectiveness of teams and organizations. One effective way to improve interfaces and isolation is by improving the testability of services and components. If your design allows you to test your service in isolation, then its interface is by definition loosely coupled. So what they are saying here is basically that if you have smaller pieces in your system and you can test those smaller pieces, then you have a higher testability. So perhaps you can like mock the dependencies, you can inject some sort of data there to test scenarios which, when you have a fully integrated system, you wouldn't be able to. So this is a great way to also solve some of your technical challenges with mostly environments and test data. And then I think, well, most people are acquainted with the testing pyramid. So it just says that you should have more unit tests and less UI tests, because UI tests are slower, they are more expensive, and unit tests are faster and less expensive. So you should bet on having more of those. While for some people this may not be exactly true, and it may not apply so much, it is a good rule of thumb. And what this is saying is that you should shift left. So you should have a better automated test distribution to enable shifting left, and this will make it so that you have more unit tests. You may be able to have component tests with mocks to test different scenarios. You may have service tests with mock dependencies, so you don't depend on other services, which brings more complexity and also more difficulties with environments, with data, etc. And you may also have things like integration tests with test configurations, like I already mentioned before. For team skills and team maturity, what I would recommend is, from a development perspective, if your team is not fully technical, maybe start with no-code or low-code tools, and then try to go from there to high-level programming, like keyword-driven frameworks, and then full-blown programming. So depending on the maturity and the skills of your team, you can go to either one of these. If you go to full-blown programming, you will be able to do more. It will be more versatile. But then again, if you can't actually be very proficient in coding, then it wouldn't be good for test development either. And about execution, I would say that if you start with semi-automated tests, and when I say semi-automated, these are tests that you can set up, imagine that you can do the setup manually, and then you can take away most of the other work by having a small script that does a couple of checks that would take you a lot of time to do. And then from there, you could try to implement the setup as well and have fully automated tests. Fully automated tests would be tests that set themselves up and also clean after themselves, and you just need to run them and not worry about the setups or teardowns. And then finally have fully integrated tests. So these fully automated tests inside your pipelines. So whenever there's a new merge or something like that, immediately the build will be tested with those tests. So that would be the end goal. And this is it about planning for test automation. So now some final takeaways. So when selecting a testing framework, a test automation framework, be conscious of your tech stack, be conscious of your team's context as well, and identify your test automation risks. And then when planning, know your goals, know your system, know your test stages, know your challenges. This is all we've been through in this presentation. And then make sure your team has adequate training. What I've seen a lot as well is that people are thrown into projects and they don't have adequate training, and they are not provided with training, or even sometimes even the handover is not done efficiently, and it makes everything harder for whoever is going to try to implement more tests. And also make your automated tests shine. And what I mean is, give visibility to their results, bring them into your test management tool, create dashboards with that, do some reporting on your results, because this ultimately is what is going to get you support to automate more and more. Because if people don't see the results from your automated tests, then they won't see the value, and you won't have the support from your managers, from the stakeholders, etc. And also, the best strategy or framework is the one that works for a particular project or context. So what I'm saying here is that you don't have to pick the same framework other people are using or people say are the best. Each people knows their own context, and they should pick a framework accordingly. Also, test automation is not an end, it's a mean to achieve greater efficiency, and automation success is mostly determined by human factors. So it's not the framework that it determines the the success of the project, no matter what people tell you and how hard people sell you a framework. It's about the people who are going to use the framework and implement the test cases, because the framework is an intermediate to automation, but you are the one who needs to think about everything, about how your system works, about how you're going to set up data, about how you're going to clean up after your tests, etc. So yeah, people are a very important part of automation. And finally, don't believe the hype. This is all I have to say. Do a proof of concept, see things for yourself. Don't follow the hype.